Alright, gang, welcome back to another. Well, I guess this is the first Series 1 episode where we do review books. Because I pretty much ran out of content, so I'm gonna review books now. It's gonna be a book review channel from now on. And the book we are going to be talking about has been mentioned many times in the modern day period. It's the 1984 by George Orwell. Now, the main premise of the book is that you find yourself, or you find this character by the name of Winston, being in a super oppressive governmental system or whatever. And well, spoiler alert, I'll give you a few seconds to click off the video. He gets sort of like brainwashed to the end to become the model citizen that the entire nation wants him to. And the book is not really praised for its story, and I don't think it should be. Mainly, it's praised for how George managed to identify, I would say, these characteristics of a totalitarian regime and how people will turn into sheep or model citizens the moment shit hits the fan. Let me just say it like that. To a certain extent, I do understand why the book would be important, or why the book would be of such importance. But at the same time, I don't understand why it's so overhyped. And that is the main misunderstanding, or the main point I have with this, or the main grudge I have against this book. It's not that I hate the book. I've read it and I think it's a good book. I think it's nicely written. It was an easy read. It was not something complicated. George managed not to be too overly pretentious with his language, which I do find astonishing, as he was writing in the post-war period when many people started writing these long, boring plays that nobody would never fucking see, instead of just writing normal books. And George always managed to sort of like have his language understandable by the common folk, I would dare to say, not to insult anybody. It's not meant as a degradatory kind of thing. I mean, common folk, people who are not walking Oxford dictionaries. So, yeah, the book is pretty understandable and it's kind of an easy read. Why I think it's overhyped is that I do understand the motivation behind the book, because at the point where George was writing it, there was an imminent threat, or there was the possibility that the Russian or the Soviet Union might take over the world. Nobody really knew what would be going on. I mean, there was that entire Cold War thing. Again, you didn't know if the Russians are going to invade your country tomorrow. So, yeah, a book like this was needed. And you had a rise of many of these pseudo communists, or at least sort of communists, that wanted the Russians to invade the country because they believe communism is the way out. And I don't blame those people too. I mean, we all have delusions sometimes. But I do understand the motivation behind Orwell's book. But what I do find interesting is that many years prior to him, Huxley wrote Brave New World, which, in my opinion, is a much better depiction of what might happen if a totalitarian regime gains control. You see, many of these dystopian novels, they play with the idea that whenever there is going to be a totalitarian government, it's going to be some big bad army of Nazi-like soldiers and one supreme leader. But what can happen is when, for example, how Huxley described it, that we are just all hooked on the same substance and we can sort of let it go, and that's how the government, or that's how the institutions have their power. You just can't let go of the substance. Now, you transform this into a modern world and you start to look at things through Orwell's perspective, and you don't see too many examples of it. I mean, you still have dictatorships like North Korea, which could be described as one of these Orwell fantasies or whatever, or these 1984 countries. But in most of the countries, it's much more benevolent. And therefore, a question is posed whether we are not already living in this Huxley world, or sort of. I mean, look around you. We have so many gadgets, we have so many stuff that we can't really imagine to survive with. It, of course, is possible. But imagine tomorrow somebody just fucking decided to turn off your internet. Just for whatever reason. They just decide to do it. I mean, it's a bummer, isn't it? Because there is just so much information, there is everything on the internet. And suddenly you would have to go to the good old ways of going to a library and borrowing a book and reading it and getting the information. Now, I'm all for reading, but I'm not all for pointless reading, like buying or reading these big pointless textbooks just to find a scrap of text that you can use in your essay. The internet is amazing in this. You just enter keywords and suddenly, boom, you've got plethora of informations there which you can use and which are all relevant information written by people who know what they're talking about. And I don't think if we will ever see a totalitarian government, we won't see, that's better said, we won't see a totalitarian government 1984 style. We will see a Brave New World type of stuff. And that's why I think Huxley's book is much more important to read. I know it's got some, here and there, some people mention it, but most of the people seem to be hyping George Orwell. It's like, you have to read this because this really opens up your eyes. It does, but not to the extent Huxley does, or not to the extent Huxley explores the substances and all that. And his substance was soma. It was essentially this pill that made you like happy or in this blissful state based on the dosage you took. And whoever didn't take it was just kind of considered this weirdo or somebody. It reminds me of that game. Was it Us Happy Few or Us Lucky Few? You know which one I'm talking about. I don't really know what happened to that game. Point being is that it more reminds me of that. And I think that's a much more probable narrative that will eventually take hold or take presence in the modern day society. It's not that George Orwell's book is bad in question. As I said, it's an easy read, it's an understandable book, and it explores some good core ideas. I just think that Orwell, while writing it, wasn't really envisioning the future as it would go. Nobody really could say at the time he was writing it that the Soviet Union would eventually fall out, just kind of like disperse itself. And therefore the threat of the invasion was always there. But it's kind of astonishing Huxley, even before the war, managed to identify something that we are seeing in current society. So I wouldn't say don't read George Orwell's book or don't read 1984, but I would dare to say that first read Brave New World by Huxley, and then if you're interested in that type of stuff, go and read George Orwell's book, 1984. It's a good book, nonetheless, but I think Huxley's is more important to the modern world and to everyday interactions. And just don't overhype it. Just don't be one of those fellows. I've seen many of them on the internet that just go around and are like, I read 1984. Now I'm the smartest person alive because I can read words and I know what they mean. It's like, shut the fuck up. No one gives a shit. I don't need a constant reminder of like, there is a totalitarian regime here. Guys, look here, 1984. Am I right, fellas? I don't need that. I don't need that reminder. Just don't be fucking pretentious. Read a book, take what you want from that book, and don't fucking pretend you swallowed every single red pill there is in the world. Just be fucking normal for once. That's about it. As for the rating, I don't really give a shit about the rating. It's a good book. And that's basically it. Sorry, George, but I think Brave New World is a bit better. But, credits where credits are due. Your books are good. So, yeah, that was it. Stay safe, fellas, I guess.